The old Victorian mansion stood like a forgotten sentinel at the end of Willow Lane, its weathered façade telling stories of bygone elegance. Inside, Sarah Matthews placed a protective hand over her swollen belly, surveying the dust-covered grandeur she now called home. 3 months ago, when David walked out, she'd lost everything, except the child growing inside her and a modest inheritance from her grandmother. The crumbling estate had been an impulse purchase, a desperate grasp at a new beginning. As Sarah traced her fingers along the faded wallpaper of the upstairs hallway, she noticed something odd, measurements that didn't quite add up. What secret was this old house hiding behind its walls? And how would it forever alter the course of her life? Sarah stood in the foyer, divorce papers clutched in her trembling hands. The manila envelope had arrived just this morning, David's final goodbye, reduced to legal terminology and signature lines. 6 years of marriage dissolved on cream-colored stationery. At least he didn't fight for custody, she whispered to her unborn child, running her palm over the gentle swell of her belly. Though he made it perfectly clear he wants nothing to do with either of them. She remembered his face when she'd told him about the baby, not joy or even concern, but something closer to betrayal. "We agreed," he'd said, pacing their pristine downtown apartment. "We both said no kids. My company's about to go international. Your design firm is finally taking off." 3 days later, he was gone. A note on the kitchen counter, clothes missing from the closet. Sarah tucked the divorce papers into a drawer. She wouldn't think about that now. Instead, she surveyed the grand staircase before her, its mahogany banister dulled by years of neglect. When her grandmother's modest inheritance had come through, everyone expected her to use it for the down payment on a sensible condo. No one understood why she'd sunk every penny into this dilapidated Victorian mansion, 40 miles from the city. Sometimes, Sarah didn't understand it herself, but standing here now, even with the peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards, she felt something she hadn't in months: possibility. Her phone chimed, another message from her mother. "Have you come to your senses yet? That house is a money pit. Think about the baby." Sarah silenced her phone without responding. Her parents had always been practical to a fault. Work hard, advance your career, build security. Their devotion to climbing corporate ladders had left little room for family dinners or school recitals. Sarah had spent more time with nannies than with either of them. "We'll be different," she promised her child. "This house will be a home." She climbed the staircase slowly, wincing at each protesting creak. The realtor had been brutally honest. The place needed everything: new wiring, updated plumbing, structural repairs. The only reason she could afford it was because no one else wanted to take on such a massive project. The second-floor landing opened to a long hallway with doors on either side. Sarah had only briefly toured the house before making her impulsive offer, and now she pushed each door open with a mixture of trepidation and excitement. A master bedroom with a cracked ceiling medallion, 2 smaller bedrooms with faded floral wallpaper, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and rusting fixtures. Each space whispered of lives once lived within these walls, joys and sorrows long forgotten. The last room, tucked at the end of the hall, stopped her short. Afternoon sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating what must have been a nursery once. Faded circus animals paraded across the walls, their painted eyes following her as she stepped inside. "Look at that," Sarah whispered. "Someone prepared for a baby here, just like I'm preparing for you." She'd brought little from her old life, just clothes, her laptop, and essential toiletries. Her first furniture delivery wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. A mattress, a small dining table, and 2 chairs. She'd need to start from scratch, building a new life piece by piece. Night fell quickly and Sarah made her bed with an old sleeping bag on the living room floor. The house settling around her produced an orchestra of unfamiliar sounds: groaning pipes, ticking radiators, and the occasional skittering that suggested she wasn't entirely alone. "Just mice," she told herself firmly. "Every old house has mice." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Sarah stared at the shadows playing across the ceiling, cast by moonlight through the branches outside. For the first time since David's departure, the full weight of her situation pressed down upon her. Alone, pregnant, unemployed, and now the owner of a house that demanded far more than she might be able to give. Her design colleagues thought she was throwing away her career. Her parents believed she was having some sort of breakdown. Maybe they were right, and yet as a particularly loud creak echoed from upstairs, Sarah felt an unexpected calm settle over her. This house, with all its flaws and mysteries, needed her as much as she needed it. They would save each other, somehow. Tomorrow, she murmured, finally drifting towards sleep, we start bringing you back to life. Sarah stood in the foyer, divorce papers clutched in her trembling hands. The manila envelope had arrived just this morning. David's final goodbye reduced to legal terminology and signature lines. 6 years of marriage dissolved on cream-colored stationery. At least he didn't fight for custody, she whispered to her unborn child, running her palm over the gentle swell of her belly. Though he made it perfectly clear he wants nothing to do with either of them. She remembered his face when she'd told him about the baby, not joy or even concern, but something closer to betrayal. We agreed, he'd said, pacing their pristine downtown apartment. We both said no kids. My company's about to go international. Your design firm is finally taking off. 3 days later he was gone. A note on the kitchen counter, clothes missing from the closet. Sarah tucked the divorce papers into a drawer. She wouldn't think about that now. Instead, she surveyed the grand staircase before her, its mahogany banister dulled by years of neglect. When her grandmother's modest inheritance had come through, everyone expected her to use it for the down payment on a sensible condo. No one understood why she'd sunk every penny into this dilapidated Victorian mansion 40 miles from the city. Sometimes, Sarah didn't understand it herself, but standing here now, even with the peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards, she felt something she hadn't in months: possibility. Her phone chimed, another message from her mother. Have you come to your senses yet? That house is a money pit. Think about the baby. Sarah silenced her phone without responding. Her parents had always been practical to a fault. Work hard, advance your career, build security. Their devotion to climbing corporate ladders had left little room for family dinners or school recital. Sarah had spent more time with nannies than with either of them. We'll be different, she promised her child. This house will be a home. She climbed the staircase slowly, wincing at each protesting creak. The realtor had been brutally honest. The place needed everything: new wiring, updated plumbing, structural repairs. The only reason she could afford it was because no one else wanted to take on such a massive project. The second-floor landing opened to a long hallway with doors on either side. Sarah had only briefly toured the house before making her impulsive offer, and now she pushed each door open with a mixture of trepidation and excitement. A master bedroom with a cracked ceiling medallion. 2 smaller bedrooms with faded floral wallpaper. A bathroom with a clawfoot tub and rusting fixtures. Each space whispered of lives once lived within these walls, joys and sorrows long forgotten. The last room, tucked at the end of the hall, stopped her short. Afternoon sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating what must have been a nursery once. Faded circus animals paraded across the walls, their painted eyes following her as she stepped inside. Look at that, Sarah whispered. Someone prepared for a baby here, just like I'm preparing for you. She'd brought little from her old life, just clothes, her laptop, and essential toiletries. Her first furniture delivery wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. A mattress, a small dining table, and 2 chairs. She'd need to start from scratch, building a new life piece by piece. Night fell quickly, and Sarah made her bed with an old sleeping bag on the living room floor. The house settling around her produced an orchestra of unfamiliar sounds, groaning pipes, ticking radiators, and the occasional skittering that suggested she wasn't entirely alone. Just mice, she told herself firmly. Every old house has mice. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Sarah stared at the shadows playing across the ceiling, cast by moonlight through the branches outside. For the first time since David's departure, the full weight of her situation pressed down upon her. Alone, pregnant, unemployed, and now the owner of a house that demanded far more than she might be able to give. Her design colleagues thought she was throwing away her career. Her parents believed she was having some sort of breakdown. Maybe they were right. And yet, as a particularly loud creak echoed from upstairs, Sarah felt an unexpected calm settle over her. This house, with all its flaws and mysteries, needed her as much as she needed it. They would save each other. Somehow. Tomorrow, she murmured, finally drifting towards sleep, we start bringing you back to life. Sarah stared at the estimate from the contractor, her stomach sinking. The amount was nearly triple what she'd budgeted for essential repairs. She'd known renovating would be expensive, but this was impossible. Her inheritance was already stretched thin between the down payment and immediate living expenses. I can't possibly afford this, she told her unborn child, resting her hand on her growing belly. We'll have to get creative. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a tall, weathered man in his 50s standing on her porch. He wore faded work clothes and carried a worn toolbox. Name's Tom Callahan, he said, extending a calloused hand. Eleanor mentioned you might need some help with repairs. I do handyman work in the area. Sarah hesitated. I appreciate that, but I just got an estimate that's way beyond my means. Tom glanced at the paper in her hand. Blake Construction. They specialize in historical renovations for wealthy folks from the city. Not exactly budget-friendly. He shifted his weight. Mind if I take a look around? No charge for an assessment. After an hour of inspecting the house, Tom sat with Sarah at her newly delivered kitchen table. Structure's better than it looks, he said. Main issues are electrical, some roof repairs before winter, and that sagging section of foundation on the east side. Everything else is cosmetic. What would you charge to handle the essentials? Sarah asked cautiously. Tom named a figure less than half of the contractor's estimate. You'd have to source materials, and I can only work afternoons and weekends. Got a farm to run mornings. Relief washed over Sarah. When can you start? Tomorrow, Tom said with a slight nod. Bring my tools for the electrical first. With renewed hope, Sarah spent the afternoon clearing the overgrown gardens. The previous owners, or perhaps years of neglect, had allowed nature to reclaim much of the property. She attacked the weeds with determination, unearthing the remnants of once manicured flower beds. Her spade struck something metal. Curious, Sarah dug carefully around the object, eventually pulling out a tarnished locket. She pried it open to reveal a faded sepia photograph of a young woman with sad eyes and a hesitant smile. Despite the age of the photo, Sarah was struck by a strange familiarity. The woman's high cheekbones and wide-set eyes resembled her own. How odd, she murmured, slipping the locket into her pocket. That evening, Sarah drove to the local library to research her house's history. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Winters, perked up at her request. The old Pembroke place. We have a small local history section, not much on the house specifically, but some on the family. Sarah pored over weathered town records and fading photographs. Henry Pembroke had been a successful businessman in the 1920s, establishing the town's lumber mill. His wife Margaret appeared in few photographs, always standing slightly apart, her expression inscrutable. They were quite the talk of the town, Mrs. Winters remarked, arranging books nearby. Henry was prominent in business circles. Margaret was, well, people said she kept to herself. They never had children, which was considered unusual at the time. Sarah's interest sharpened. Do you know why? Mrs. Winters hesitated. There were rumors she couldn't bear children, a tragedy in those days, especially for someone of her social standing. The following days established a rhythm. Mornings, Sarah worked on clearing rooms and planning designs. Afternoons, Tom arrived to tackle the structural issues, working methodically and speaking little. Despite his reticence, Sarah found his presence comforting, a stark contrast to the eerie silence when she was alone. "Did you grow up around here?" she asked one day as they broke for water. Tom nodded. "Born and raised, left for the army, came back when my father passed to take over the family farm. What do you know about this house? About the Pembrokes?" Something flickered in Tom's eyes. Not much to tell. Rich folks, kept to themselves. He returned to replacing rotted floorboards, effectively ending the conversation. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Twice she woke, certain she'd heard footsteps in the hallway. The second time, she gathered her courage and ventured out with a flashlight. The hallway stood empty, moonlight casting long shadows through the windows. But as she turned to return to bed, a cold draft whispered past her. Impossible, since all the windows were closed. The hairs on her arms rose as she realized the chill emanated from the wall with the measurement discrepancy. Sarah pressed her palm against the wallpaper. For a heartbeat, she could have sworn she felt something press back. The wallpaper peeled away in long, satisfying strips, revealing layers of the home's history beneath. Sarah worked methodically, spraying the ancient paper with water and vinegar before carefully scraping. Each layer told a story, bold floral patterns from the 1970s, geometric designs from the 1950s, and beneath it all, delicate hand-painted patterns likely original to the house. 6 generations of terrible taste, she joked to her baby, who responded with a flutter of movement. At 6 months pregnant, Sarah could now clearly feel the child shifting and stretching within her. Tom had finished the critical electrical work yesterday, replacing knob and tube wiring that had been a fire waiting to happen. Today she was alone, determined to make visible progress on at least one room. Sarah paused, stretching her aching back. The upstairs hallway had become her current project after she'd noticed something odd about the wall measurements. As she removed a particular claddon section of wallpaper near the built-in bookcase, she noticed a change in the paint color beneath. "That's strange," she murmured, peeling more carefully around the area. Behind the bookcase, the wall was painted a rich forest green, while the rest of the hallway revealed pale yellow. Sarah ran her fingers along the edge of the bookcase, noticing it wasn't built into the wall as she'd initially thought, but rather attached to it. She pushed experimentally, but the heavy oak piece didn't budge. Sarah examined it more closely, noticing that despite decades of neglect throughout the house, this bookcase was oddly free of the thick dust coating everything else. When Tom arrived that afternoon, she showed him her discovery. "See how the paint is different behind the bookcase. And look at these measurements." She held up the blueprint she'd found in the attic. "According to this, there should be more space between this wall and the exterior wall." Tom studied the blueprint, then the bookcase. Without comment, he ran his hands along the edges of the furniture piece, his fingers exploring with the precision of someone who understood how things were built and how they could be concealed. "Let's move it," he said finally. Together they emptied the shelves of ancient mildewing books and bric-a-brac. Even empty, the bookcase was tremendously heavy. Tom examined the base, then pointed. "It's anchored to the floor, not just sitting on it." He knelt, finding screws hidden beneath decorative molding. Someone didn't want this moved accidentally. After removing the screws, they pushed. The bookcase swung outward with unexpected ease, revealing what was unmistakably the outline of a door painted over and sealed, but distinctly a door. "My God," Sarah whispered, "there really is a hidden room." Tom knocked on the sealed door, listening carefully. Solid core, probably original to the house. He ran his fingers along the edge where a doorknob would have been. Removed the hardware and painted over it. "Wouldn't even notice if you weren't looking for it." "Can we open it?" Sarah asked, heart racing with anticipation. Tom inspected the sealed edges. "Need to cut through the paint first, then see if we can figure out how it was secured." Might need to break the jamb if it's nailed shut from inside. While Tom retrieved tools from his truck, Sarah knelt to examine the baseboard where it met the wall. A section looked slightly different, newer perhaps, or at least less weathered. She worked her fingers around the edge and felt it give slight. Prying carefully with a screwdriver, Sarah removed the small section of baseboard. Behind it, tucked into a cavity in the wall, sat a tarnished skeleton key with an ornate bow. Her hands trembled as she held it up to the fading afternoon light. The key was heavy, made of solid brass with an intricate pattern of what looked like ivy leaves decorating its handle. "Found something?" Tom asked, returning with his tools. Sarah held up the key, hidden behind the baseboard. Tom's eyebrows rose, the most expression she'd seen from him. Convenient. As they worked to free the sealed door, Sarah couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Why had someone gone to such lengths to hide this room? What would they find inside? By the time they'd cut through the layers of paint sealing the door edges, dusk had fallen. Tom switched on the new work lights he'd installed. "Want to try that key?" he asked. Sarah hesitated, key clutched in her palm. In the artificial light, shadows stretched long and deep across the hallway. A cold draft seemed to emanate from the hair-thin opening they'd created around the door. "Maybe we should wait until morning," she suggested, suddenly reluctant. Tom studied her face. "Your house, your call." That night, Sarah dreamed of a woman in a white nightgown, standing at the end of her bed. The woman's face remained in shadow, but her pregnant belly was clearly visible beneath the thin fabric. "Please," the woman whispered, gesturing toward the hallway. "It's time." Sarah woke with the skeleton key clutched in her hand, though she had no memory of retrieving it from the kitchen table where she'd left it. Morning sunlight streamed through the hall window as Sarah stood before the hidden door, the skeleton key cold in her palm. Tom hadn't arrived yet, and part of her wanted to wait for him, but the dream had left her with an urgency she couldn't explain. "It's time," the woman had said. Taking a deep breath, Sarah inserted the key into the lock. It slid in perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her touch. The mechanism turned with surprising ease, a solid click echoing in the quiet hallway. Sarah hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Whatever lay behind this door had been deliberately concealed. Did she really want to uncover its secrets? Her child kicked decisively, as if answering for her. Sarah smiled, placing her free hand on her belly. "You're right, we didn't come this far to turn back now." She turned the knob and pushed. The door swung open with a low creak of protest. Dust motes danced in the beam of sunlight that pierced the darkness beyond. Sarah fumbled for the flashlight in her pocket, switching it on with trembling fingers. The beam illuminated a perfectly preserved runway. Sarah gasped, stepping cautiously into the room. Unlike the rest of the house, which had been stripped of most personal belongings, this space remained frozen in time. A wooden crib stood against one wall, draped with a hand-stitched quilt. A rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. Shelves lined with antique toys and books. A changing table with neatly folded yellowed linens. But most striking was the mobile hanging above the crib. Delicately carved wooden animals suspended on faded ribbons, waiting to dance in a breeze that hadn't stirred them in decades. Sarah approached in wonder, reaching up to gently touch one of the wooden figures, a little elephant with a raised trunk. The mobile swayed with her touch, animals dancing in a slow circle. A soft melody began to play, startling her, a music box mechanism, still functional after all these years. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The room held none of the decay evident in the rest of the house. The floorboards were solid beneath her feet, the ceiling unmarred by water damage. Even the wallpaper, a parade of storybook characters, retained its color and charm. Sarah moved to the window and pulled back heavy velvet curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, revealing even more details. A bookshelf filled with children's stories, A small desk with a child-sized chair, framed nursery rhymes on the walls. This room had been prepared with loving care, yet the house had no record of children. Eleanor had mentioned that the Pembrokes had been childless. Had they prepared this nursery in hope, only to have those hopes dashed? As Sarah explored, her attention was drawn to the crib. Something lay in its center, a small, leather-bound book. She picked it up, running her fingers over the embossed cover. No title, just intricate floral designs surrounding a monogram, MP, Margaret Pembroke. Inside, handwritten entries filled the pages in elegant flowing script. A journal. Sarah settled into the rocking chair, journal in hand, and began to read the first entry. April 15, 1922. Henry has given me this beautiful house as a wedding gift. He says a home this grand should be filled with children's laughter. I pray God blesses us quickly. I've already begun planning the nursery, though Henry tells me not to get ahead of myself. But I've waited my whole life to become a mother. Now that we're married, I can't help but dream of the child that will make our family complete. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. The longing in those words resonated deeply with her. Despite the different circumstances, she recognized the yearning for a child, the desire to create a family. Further entries detailed Margaret's growing desperation as months, then years passed without a pregnancy. Her husband's initial patience curdling into disappointment, then resentment. November 3, 1924. Another month, another failure. The doctor says there's nothing physically wrong, that we must simply keep trying. Henry barely looks at me anymore. I've begun work on the nursery in secret. He would call it foolish, a waste of resources, but I need something to hope for. If I prepare a place, perhaps God will see my faithfulness and bless us with a child to fill it. Sarah closed the journal. Over poor Margaret, creating this beautiful nursery, while her marriage crumbled around her. A noise from the doorway startled her. Tom stood there, taking in the preserved room with undisguised amazement. You opened it, he said simply. Sarah nodded. It's a nursery, a perfect nursery that was never used. She held up the journal. It belonged to Margaret Pembroke. She wanted a child desperately. Tom stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything. Strange that no one's touched this room in all these years. Sarah ran her hand over her belly. Not strange, sad. She looked around the room, seeing it with new eyes. She created this room out of hope and longing. When that hope died, they sealed it away. As if responding to her words, the mobile above the crib began to turn on its own, the melody playing softly though no breeze stirred the air. The journal became Sarah's evening companion. After long days of renovation work, she would retreat to the rocking chair in the hidden nursery, reading Margaret Pembroke's words by the light of a modern lamp she'd brought in. The more she read, the more strongly she felt connected to the woman who had lived in this house a century before. January 10th, 1925. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of disappointment. Dr. Griffith suggested today that perhaps the fault lies not with my body, but with my mind. He claims women who worry too much about conceiving often cannot. As if my desire for a child is preventing the very thing I want most. Henry nodded along, seeming relieved to have the blame placed on my nervous disposition rather than any deficiency of his own. Sarah felt a surge of indignation on Margaret's behalf. Even a century later, women's health concerns were too often dismissed as psychological rather than physical. She stroked her own growing belly, grateful for modern medicine and the knowledge that had eluded women like Margaret. February 3, 1925. Another miscarriage. The third. So brief a hope this time, barely 6 weeks before the familiar pains and blood. I didn't even tell Henry I suspected I was with child. What would be the point? He has grown cold these past months, staying later at his office, attending more business dinners. Mrs. Collins hints that he's been seen at the hotel bar with his secretary. I cannot bring myself to care anymore. The parallel to Sarah's own situation was unsettling. David, too, had grown distant before he left, working late, attending endless networking events. The difference was that Margaret remained trapped in her marriage, bound by the social conventions of her time. April 18, 1925. I've completed the nursery at last. Henry never comes to this wing of the house anymore, so he hasn't discovered it. Each item I've selected with such care: the crib imported from England, the mobile carved by that talented man in the village, the linens embroidered by my own hand. Sometimes I sit in this room for hours, rocking in the chair, imagining a child in my arms. Am I going mad? Perhaps the doctor was right after all. Sarah looked up from the journal, gazing around the nursery. Everything Margaret described was still here, preserved as if waiting: the carved mobile, the imported crib, the hand-embroidered linens, a monument to longing. June 12, 1925, Mrs. Winters from the library suggested I speak with a woman who lives on the edge of town. Not a proper doctor, she whispered, but she's helped women like you before. And desperate enough to try anything now, Henry has stopped visiting my bed entirely. Without a child, I fear our marriage is truly over. The entries that followed documented Margaret's clandestine visits to a woman named Ida Gray, described as a healer who practiced folk remedies passed down through generations of women. Ida provided Margaret with herbal tinctures and advised rituals that combined Christian prayer with what seemed like older pagan traditions. August 20, 1925, Ida says I must create a sacred space for the child I seek to welcome. The nursery I've built is a good start, but she says I must add certain elements, objects of power and intention. I brought her here secretly yesterday. She walked through the room with her eyes closed, murmuring words I couldn't understand. Before leaving, she pressed a small cloth bag into my hand. Keep this beneath your mattress, she instructed, and each night before sleeping, recite the psalm I've taught you. Henry would call this superstition, even witchcraft. But what has his modern medicine done for us? Sarah set down the journal, her mind swirling with questions. What had been in that cloth bag? What rituals had Margaret performed in this very room? A soft thud from the corner startled her. One of the wooden blocks had fallen from its shelf, though Sarah was certain she hadn't touched it. She rose awkwardly, her pregnant belly making movement increasingly cumbersome, and crossed to replace the block. As she did, she noticed something she'd overlooked before: small symbols carved into the wooden toys, not mere decorations but deliberate markings that reminded her of the sigils she'd seen in documentaries about folk magic. Sarah's skin prickled. The mobile above the crib began to turn slowly, its melody playing softly, though there was no breeze to move it. "Margaret," she whispered, feeling both foolish and frightened. "Are you here?" The music stopped abruptly. For a moment the air in the room seemed to thicken, as if charged with expectation. Then Sarah felt it, a distinct kick from her unborn child, stronger than any previous movement. She placed her hand over the spot. "You feel it too, don't you?" she murmured. When she returned to her bedroom that night, Sarah found that the arrangement of items on her dresser had changed slightly. The antique locket she'd discovered in the garden now lay open, the faded photograph facing upward. Sarah was certain she'd left it closed. The Town Historical Society occupied a small corner of the public library, a single room filled with glass display cases and filing cabinets. Sarah had driven in hoping to find more information about the Pembrokes, particularly Margaret and her connection to the mysterious Ida Gray. A bespectacled man in his 60s looked up from a stack of papers as she entered. "Can I help you? I hope so. I'm Sarah Matthews. I recently bought the old Pembroke house." The man's demeanor changed subtly, his welcoming smile tightening at the corners. "Walter Graham. I'm the town historian." He hesitated before adding, "The Pembroke house has quite a history." "That's what I'm hoping to learn more about," Sarah said, settling into a chair across from his desk. "Particularly about Margaret Pembroke." Walter's expression grew guarded. "Not much to tell. Henry Pembroke was a prominent businessman, built the lumber mill that employed half the town until it closed in the 70s. Margaret was his wife. They had no children, but she wanted them desperately, Sarah pressed. I found her journal. Walter's eyebrows shot up. You found Margaret's writings? Where? Sarah hesitated, suddenly reluctant to mention the hidden nursery. In the house. I've been renovating. Interesting. Walter leaned back in his chair. The Pembroke story isn't a happy one, I'm afraid. Not the sort of thing we highlight in our town brochures. I'd still like to know. With obvious reluctance, Walter retrieved a folder from a filing cabinet. We don't have much. Some newspaper clippings, a few photographs. He spread the contents on the desk. Sarah picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping, dated October 12, 1926. The headline read, "Tragedy Strikes Pembroke Household." The article was frustratingly vague, describing only an unfortunate incident requiring Margaret Pembroke's temporary residence at Lakeside Sanitarium for nervous exhaustion. Reading between the lines, Sarah suspected a mental health commitment, likely involuntary. Another clipping from 2 months later mentioned Henry Pembroke's tireless devotion to his indisposed wife and his decision to take extended leave from business affairs to attend to domestic matters. This doesn't tell me much, Sarah said. Walter sighed. Small towns protect their own. The Pembrokes were important people. Whatever happened, it was kept quiet. Do you know anything about a woman named Ida Gray? She was some kind of healer who helped Margaret. Walter's face closed completely. I'm afraid not. The lie was transparent. Mr. Graham, I'm living in that house. I'm pregnant, alone, and finding some unusual things. Anything you know could help me make sense of what's happening. For a moment, Walter seemed to wrestle with himself. Finally, he said, there are stories about Margaret's desperation for a child, rumors that she turned to unconventional methods when medicine failed her. You mean Ida Gray? Walter glanced around as if concerned about being overheard, though they were alone. Ida's family had lived in these parts since before the town existed. Some called her a witch, others a healer. Desperate women sought her help with all manner of female troubles, including infertility. Especially that. Walter adjusted his glasses nervously. Local legend says she practiced a form of folk magic, not the Hollywood nonsense, but old traditions brought from Europe, mixed with indigenous practices. Did she help Margaret? That depends on who you ask. Walter lowered his voice. Some say Margaret finally conceived with Ida's help. Others say what grew in her wasn't entirely natural. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. What does that mean? Walter abruptly gathered the materials. It's just superstition. The official record states Margaret suffered a mental collapse and was institutionalized. Henry closed up the house after her commitment and rarely visited town again. He died in 1945. The house stood empty until it was sold in the 60s. And Margaret? What happened to her? Officially, she died at Lakeside in 1930. Pneumonia. Walter hesitated, though there were rumors she escaped the sanitarium during a storm. Some claimed to have seen a woman who looked like her around town years later. Sarah thought of the nursery perfectly preserved. And the house? Who owned it after Henry died? It passed through several owners. None stayed long. Walter stood, clearly indicating the conversation was over. If you're wise, Miss Matthews, you'll sell too. Some places carry too much history. As Sarah left the Historical Society, she noticed several older residents watching her with undisguised curiosity. One elderly woman approached as she reached her car. You're living in the Pembroke house, the woman stated. Yes, I am. The woman studied her face intently, then glanced at Sarah's pregnant belly. You look just like her, you know. Same eye. Before Sarah could respond, the woman hurried away. Driving home, Sarah couldn't shake the woman's words. Back at the house, she held Margaret's locket up to a mirror, comparing the faded photograph to her own reflection. The resemblance was undeniable. Everything looks normal, Winters confirmed, moving the ultrasound wand across Sarah's rounded belly. Strong heartbeat, good growth, proper positioning. Sarah released the breath she'd been holding. "Are you sure? No abnormalities?" The doctor gave her a curious look. "Is there something specific you're concerned about?" How could she explain the growing fear that had taken root since reading Margaret's journal and visiting the Historical Society? That somehow the house, or Margaret herself, had formed a connection with her unborn child. "Just general anxiety, I guess. Being alone during pregnancy isn't what I planned." Dr. Winters nodded sympathetically. "You're doing remarkably well, all things considered. But I am concerned about your isolation. That old house is miles from town, and with winter approaching," she paused. "Do you have someone who checks on you regularly?" "The handyman comes almost daily, and my neighbor Eleanor visits." "Good, but you should consider joining our expectant mothers group. It meets Tuesdays at the community center." Sarah nodded non-committally. The idea of making small talk with strangers exhausted her. Besides, her connection to Margaret's story felt intensely private, something other mothers-to-be couldn't possibly understand. Driving home, Sarah detoured to the local diner. She hadn't intended to stop, but as she passed, she spotted Tom's truck in the parking lot. On impulse, she pulled in. The lunch crowd had thinned, and Tom sat alone at a corner booth, a half-eaten sandwich before him. He looked up in surprise as Sarah slid into the seat across from him. "Doctor's appointment went well?" he asked, after she'd ordered coffee. "Everything's normal." Sarah stirred cream into her decaf. "Tom, can I ask you something personal?" His expression remained neutral, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "Depends on the question. Eleanor mentioned you were married once." Tom's gaze dropped to his plate. "Eleanor talks too much. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Her name was Evelyn." Tom's voice was quiet, but steady. "Cancer took her 5 years ago. Quick and merciless. I'm so sorry." Tom nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without inviting more. "We wanted kids. Never happened for us. Doctors couldn't find a reason why." The parallel to Margaret's story sent a shiver through Sarah. "Is that why you've been so helpful with the nurse? Because you and Evelyn never got to have one?" A muscle worked in Tom's jaw. "Maybe," he met her eyes, "or maybe I just don't like the idea of a pregnant woman alone in that old house with winter coming." The simple kindness in his words brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "Either way, I'm grateful." They finished their meals in comfortable silence. As they were leaving, Tom hesitated by her car. "I found something in the master bedroom yesterday, when I was reinforcing that sagging floorboard. Thought you might want to see it." From his pocket, he withdrew a small leather-bound notebook, much like Margaret's journal but smaller. Sarah took it carefully. "What is it?" "Medical records, looks like. Doctor's notes about Margaret Pembroke. Found it tucked between the floorboards." Back at the house, Sarah settled in the nursery rocking chair to examine the notebook. It contained detailed medical observations of Margaret, written in a cramped clinical hand. The entries, dated between 1925 and 1926, documented a series of treatments administered by Dr. Edward Jenkins. What Sarah read disturbed her deeply. The treatments described as innovative fertility therapy included everything from electric shock to the reproductive organs to injections of various animal hormones. Each failed attempt was followed by increasingly experimental procedures, with clinical notes about Margaret's hysterical reactions and nervous disposition undermining treatment efficacy. The final entry, dated September 30, 1926, stated simply, "Patient exhibits signs of delusional thinking. Claims pregnancy achieved through unconventional means. Physical examination reveals no such condition. Recommend immediate commitment to Lakeside for rest cure and psychiatric evaluation." Sarah closed the notebook, feeling ill. Poor Margaret, subjected to painful, invasive treatments by doctors who blamed her when they failed. No wonder she had turned to Ida Gray in desperation. That night, as she prepared for bed, Sarah felt a strange warmth envelop her, not threatening but protective. The nursery mobile began playing its melody from down the hall, though she knew no one was in that room. "I understand now," Sarah whispered to the empty house. "You just wanted a child to love." In response, the lights flickered gently, and Sarah's baby gave a strong kick, as if acknowledging the unseen presence that had become part of their lives. Later, deep in the night, Sarah woke to find herself not in her bed, but standing in the nursery, her hands resting on the crib rail. She had no memory of walking there. More unsettling still, the wooden animals on the mobile were arranged in a perfect circle, though they had been tangled when she'd last seen them. And in the center of the crib lay Margaret's locket, open to reveal the faded photograph. Sarah was certain she'd left it on her bedside table. The wall cavity behind the loose baseboard shouldn't have been large enough to contain anything substantial. Yet when Sarah reached inside, her fingers closed around something solid. She carefully extracted a small, leather-bound journal, similar to Margaret's first diary, but more weathered, its pages warped as if it had once been wet and improperly dried. This was the second hidden journal she'd discovered in as many weeks. The house seemed determined to reveal its secrets to her, one fragment at a time. Sarah settled into the nursery rocking chair, which had become her favorite spot in the house. Outside, November winds rattled the windows, promising the first snow of the season. Inside, the room remained oddly warm and peaceful. The journal's first page bore Margaret's familiar handwriting, but the script was different, more hurried, less controlled than in the earlier diary. November 15th, 1926. I write this from my sister's home in Burlington. Henry believes I am at Lakeside Sanitarium, where he committed me after Dr. Jenkins declared me delusional. The doctor refused to believe I am with child, despite all evidence. My sister Catherine helped me escape during transfer. I will remain here until I can determine what to do. Sarah's heart raced. So Margaret had escaped institutionalization. The official records Walter had shown her were wrong. November 28, 1926. Catherine took me to her physician today. He confirms what I already knew. I am indeed with child, approximately 3 months along. When I told him about Dr. Jenkins' denial, he seemed troubled. "Some doctors," he said carefully, "prefer diagnoses that satisfy their patrons." Henry never wanted this child. Could he have persuaded Jenkins to declare me insane rather than pregnant? The thought chills me to the bone. Sarah placed a protective hand over her own pregnant belly, horrified by the idea of a husband so opposed to fatherhood he would commit his wife rather than acknowledge her pregnancy. The entries that followed documented Margaret's growing fear that Henry would find her, and her decision to seek help from Ida Gray one final time. December 10th, 1926. I returned to Willow Creek in secret today. Ida was not surprised to see me. "I've been expecting you," she said. When I explained my situation, she nodded as if confirming something she already knew. "The child you carry is special," she told me, "born of both science and spirit. Your doctor's treatments prepared your body, but it was our ritual that quickened the seed. But I don't understand her meaning, but I trust her more than any doctor now." Sarah paused in her reading, considering the implications. Had Margaret's pregnancy resulted from some combination of the medical treatments and Ida's folk magic? Or was this simply the desperate rationalization of a woman who had endured years of disappointment? December 15th, 1926. Ida has taught me a ritual to protect my unborn child from Henry. She calls it a binding of blood and intent. I must return to the house, to the nursery I created, to perform it. The risk terrifies me, but Ida insists it must be done there, where my longing for a child was strongest. I leave tomorrow night, while Henry is away on business. The next entry was dated several days later, the handwriting noticeably shakier. December 19th, 1926. The ritual is complete. I cannot describe what transpired in that room. Some experiences defy words, but I felt a presence there, something ancient and powerful that responded to my plea. Ida says I have created a guardian for my child, bound to the space where my desire for motherhood was purest. I pray she is right. I cannot return to the house again. It's too dangerous. But I've hidden this journal where I hope someday someone who needs it will find it. The final pages contained instructions for a ritual, described in meticulous detail, symbols to be drawn, words to be spoken, items to be arranged in specific patterns. Sarah recognized some of the symbols. They matched the carvings on the wooden toys she'd found in the nursery. The very last page held a surprise. Taped to the paper was a small brass key, unlike any Sarah had seen in the house. Beneath it, Margaret had written, "For the music box. Play it when the child is in danger." Sarah looked up, her gaze immediately drawn to the shelf, where she'd noticed an ornate music box days ago, but hadn't examined closely. Rising awkwardly, she retrieved the box, a beautiful thing of inlaid wood with mother-of-pearl accents. The key fit perfectly. When she turned it, the box opened to reveal a velvet interior and a tiny mechanical cylinder. A hauntingly familiar melody began to play, the same tune she'd been hearing in her dreams for weeks. As the notes filled the room, Sarah felt her baby respond with a series of strong kicks. The air around her seemed to thicken and warm, as if something unseen had drawn close to listen. "Margaret," she whispered. The music box played on, but now Sarah was certain she wasn't alone in the room. Something, or someone, was with her, drawn by the melody that connected them across time. "There's definitely something behind this wall," Tom said, tapping the basement's stone foundation. The hollow echo confirmed his suspicion. "False wall, probably added later than the original construction." Sarah held the worklight higher, illuminating the damp basement corner they'd been investigating. "Can we break through?" "Should be able to. It's just brick facing, not structural." Tom selected a sledgehammer from his tools. "Stand back." The first blow sent dust and mortar fragments flying. By the fifth strike, a small opening appeared. Tom worked methodically, enlarging the hole until they could see a small chamber beyond. "Looks like some kind of storage room," he said, shining his flashlight through the opening. "Hand me that pry bar." With the pry bar, Tom removed enough bricks to create an opening they could step through. Sarah went first, ducking carefully into the hidden space. The beam of her flashlight revealed a room approximately 8 feet square, its dirt floor packed hard from use. Unlike the rest of the basement, this space showed signs of deliberate arrangement. A small wooden table stood against one wall, its surface covered with an embroidered cloth. Shelves lined another wall, holding dozens of glass jars containing herbs, dried flowers, and substances Sarah couldn't identify. Most striking was the ceiling, from which hung bundles of dried plants, crystals on strings, and what appeared to be small animal bones, all arranged in concentric circles. "What is this place?" Tom wondered, his voice hushed. "It's an altar room," Sarah replied, recognition dawning as she recalled the descriptions from Margaret's second journal. This is where she performed the ritual. The air felt different here, still and expectant, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Sarah approached the table, noticing symbols drawn in faded red paint along its edge. They matched the designs in Margaret's journal and on the nursery toys. "Look at these," she said, pointing to the markings. "They're protection symbols. Margaret created this space for her ritual to safeguard her unborn child." Tom examined the symbols with a frown. "My grandmother had something similar on her doorposts. She called them guardian marks." "Old country superstition," she said. Sarah opened Margaret's journal to the ritual description. According to this, she combined elements from different traditions: Christian prayers, European folk magic, and some practices she learned from Ida Gray. Folk magic, Tom repeated skeptically. You believe in that stuff? Sarah thought of the music box playing on its own, the items that moved when she wasn't looking, the protective presence she often felt. I'm starting to. She turned slowly, taking in the full scope of the room. Though dusty and long abandoned, it retained a sense of purpose, of power. This was no dabbler's play space, but a serious ritual chamber, created by a woman desperate enough to try anything. The ritual required specific elements, Sarah explained, reading from the journal. Sacred space, symbols of protection, offerings of personal significance, and blood, her own, to bind the intention. Blood magic, Tom muttered. That crosses a line. She was trying to protect her baby from a husband who wanted to lock her away. I'd say that justifies crossing a few lines. Tom didn't argue, but his discomfort was evident as he surveyed the room. What happened to her? After the ritual? Sarah closed the journal. She doesn't say. The journal ends after she describes completing it. According to Walter at the Historical Society, the official record states she died in the sanitarium in 1930. But clearly she escaped at least once, so who knows? A faint scratching sound from above made them both look up. Dust sifted down from between the floorboards. Just the house settling, Tom said, though he didn't sound convinced. Sarah wasn't so sure. Since finding the second journal and playing the music box, the house's strange occurrences had intensified. Doors opening on their own, objects relocating, the nursery mobile playing its melody at odd hours. I think we should go, she said suddenly, an unexplainable urgency gripping her. This space feels private, like we're intruding. As they climbed the basement stairs, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had awakened something in the hidden room, something that had been dormant but not gone, waiting patiently through the decades for someone who would understand. The grocery store clerk's smile vanished when Sarah mentioned her address. The woman's hands stilled on the register, eyes darting to Sarah's pregnant belly before looking away quickly. The old Pembroke place, she muttered, resuming her scanning with newfound haste. Don't get many folks staying there long. It was the third such reaction Sarah had encountered that morning. The hardware store owner had grown visibly uncomfortable when she'd asked about materials to restore antique woodwork. The pharmacist had practically thrown her prenatal vitamins at her after learning where she lived. As she loaded groceries into her car, Sarah noticed a folded paper tucked under her windshield wiper. Thinking it was an advertisement, she almost discarded it until she saw the handwritten message, "Leave the house and its secrets alone. Some doors should stay closed. For your baby's sake." Sarah's hands trembled as she reread the anonymous warning. Who would threaten a pregnant woman? And how did they know about the doors she'd opened, the nursery, the ritual room in the basement? Eleanor was watering plants on her porch when Sarah pulled up to the blue farmhouse. The older woman's welcoming smile faltered at Sarah's expression. "What's happened, dear?" Sarah showed her the note. Eleanor's face hardened as she read it. "Come inside," she said firmly. "I'll make tea." In Eleanor's cozy kitchen, Sarah explained the cold reception she'd received in town and the warning note. "It's not the first time," Eleanor sighed, setting steaming mugs on the table. "This town has a long memory and an unfortunate tendency towards superstition." Superstition about what? The house? Margaret! Eleanor stared into her tea. Both. There are families here whose grandparents whispered about Margaret Pembroke's unnatural practices. They claim she dabbled in things no God-fearing woman should touch. Folk magic, Sarah supplied. "I found the ritual room in the basement." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. "I see you've been busy uncovering secrets, not intentionally. The house seems to be revealing things to me. Perhaps it's time I revealed something too." Eleanor set down her cup. "The Pembroke house has a reputation as being unwelcoming to most who try to live there. Strange occurrences, accidents, illnesses. Most families leave within a year, but not me. No, Eleanor agreed. The house seems to have accepted you, and that frightens certain people in town. People from families who've kept secrets for generations. What secrets? About what really happened to Margaret. About the child, Sarah's breath caught. What child? The records say they were childless. Official records don't always tell the whole truth. Eleanor's gaze was steady. Especially when powerful men want certain facts buried. Before Eleanor could elaborate, Sarah's phone rang. Tom calling about a plumbing issue he'd discovered. By the time she hung up, something in Eleanor's demeanor had changed, her momentary openness replaced with careful reserve. "I've said too much," the older woman murmured. "Some stories aren't mine to tell." When Sarah returned home, she found her car vandalized, the word witch spray-painted across the driver's side door. Her hands shook with anger as she called the sheriff's office. Deputy Hayes took photographs but seemed unsurprised. "We'll look into it," he said without conviction. "But without witnesses." "This is harassment," Sarah insisted. "First threatening notes, now this." The deputy's expression remained impassive. "Old houses come with old stories, Miss Matthews, stories some folks take seriously." After he left, Sarah sat on the porch steps, fighting back frustrated tears. The baby kicked vigorously as if sharing her agitation. "We're not leaving," she whispered, stroking her belly. "This is our home now." As twilight deepened, Tom's truck rumbled up the driveway. He examined the vandalism without comment, then retrieved cleaning supplies from his vehicle. "Got paint remover that should take care of this," he said, kneeling beside the car. "Won't let them run you off." His simple support nearly undid her composure. "Thank you." While Tom worked on the car, Sarah felt the now familiar warmth of an unseen presence wrapping around her. Protective, almost maternal. "We're not alone in this," she thought, oddly comforted. Margaret's still watching over her house. And now, somehow, she's watching over us too. The nursery mobile turned slowly above the crib, its melody playing softly as Sarah examined each carved wooden animal. She'd noticed something odd about them yesterday, small compartments cleverly hidden within each figure. So far, she'd found nothing inside the elephant, giraffe, or lion. The rabbit, however, yielded to her gentle pressure, revealing a tiny cavity. Inside lay Margaret's final journal, smaller than the others. Its leather binding worn thin with age. Sarah settled into the rocking chair, feeling her baby shift within her as she opened the delicate pages. The handwriting was unmistakably Margaret's, but more hurried, almost frantic compared to her earlier journals. January 3rd, 1927. "I write this from a small boarding house near Burlington, where I've been hiding since the ritual. The snow has been relentless, making travel difficult. My condition is advancing rapidly now, faster than seems natural. Ida warned this might happen. A child of both worlds," she called it, "grows according to different rules." A chill ran through Sarah despite the nursery's perpetual warmth. What had Margaret's ritual actually accomplished? January 28th, 1927. Catherine visited yesterday with troubling news. "Henry has hired investigators to search for me. He tells everyone I've suffered a mental collapse, that I'm delusional and dangerous to myself. Why this pretense? Why not simply divorce his barren, embarrassing wife? Catherine believes he fears scandal. A wife who escaped an asylum makes for vicious gossip. But I sense something darker in his determination. Does he somehow know about the child?" Sarah turned the page, captivated by the unfolding drama. Margaret's words painted a vivid picture of a desperate woman on the run, her pregnancy advancing as winter raged outside. February 15th, 1927. The baby moves constantly now. Sometimes I wake to find my hands glowing faintly in the darkness, a side effect of the ritual, Ida said when I wrote to her. The child is protected, wrapped in intentions and symbols even within my body. I fear what Henry might do if he finds us. The investigators came to Catherine's home yesterday. It's no longer safe for me here. The entries grew more sporadic and increasingly paranoid. Margaret described moving frequently, always one step ahead of her husband's searches. She wrote of strange dreams where she returned to the nursery, of hearing her music box playing though it remained in the house she'd fled. March 30th, 1927. I can delay no longer. The child will come soon, and I need safety, not just physical shelter but spiritual protection. The ritual I performed was specific to the nursery. Only there will my baby receive the full protection I've sacrificed so much to provide. I must return to the house one last time. Sarah's heart raced. Had Margaret returned to give birth in the very room where Sarah now sat? April 2nd, 1927. A terrible storm rages outside as I write this. The journey back was harrowing, miles on foot through spring mud after the wagon broke an axle. I arrived to find the house empty, Henry away on business according to gossip at the village store. Divine intervention or mere luck? Either way, I've barricaded myself in the nursery. Labor pains began an hour ago. If something happens to me, let it be known that I, Margaret Elizabeth Pembroke, of sound mind despite my husband's claims, wish my child to be raised far from Henry's influence. I've hidden documents in the safe, proof of my inheritance, funds Henry doesn't know I possess. Whoever finds this journal, please protect my child. This was the final entry. Sarah closed the journal, hands trembling. What had happened to Margaret? Had she given birth successfully? And what of the child? Sarah examined the mobile again. The remaining animals, a deer, bear, and fox, must contain more secrets. The deer opened easily, revealing a small stone pendant engraved with the same symbols found in the ritual room. When she touched it, warmth spread through her fingers, and her unborn child gave a powerful kick in response. The music box's melody grew louder, though Sarah hadn't wound it again. I'll find the truth, she promised, both to herself and to whatever presence watched over this room. For both of us, Margaret. Outside, dark clouds gathered as the first winter storm of the season approached, mirroring the one that had raged as Margaret returned to this very room nearly a century ago. The pressure in Sarah's head built steadily all morning, a dull throbbing that intensified with each passing hour. Outside, the storm that had threatened for days finally arrived, lashing the old house with wind and freezing rain. Inside, Sarah moved restlessly from room to room, unable to settle. Something was wrong. Her body felt foreign, overheated despite the December chill. The baby, usually active by mid-morning, remained eerily still. Just a little kick, she pleaded, pressing her hands against her swollen belly. Show me you're okay in there. Her phone displayed no service. The storm had knocked out the cell tower again. The landline Tom had insisted on installing gave only a hollow dial tone. She was completely cut off. Sarah tried to remain calm, recalling her doctor's advice about monitoring fetal movement. She drank cold water, lay on her left side, prodded gently at her abdomen. Nothing. Fear clawed at her throat. She needed help, but the nearest neighbor was Eleanor, 3 miles down an increasingly treacherous road. The pressure in her head spiked suddenly, bringing her to her knees. Black spots danced before her eyes as a high-pitched ringing filled her ears. Through the mental fog, a single thought emerged with startling clarity. Go to the nursery. Sarah crawled up the stairs, each movement requiring monumental effort. The hallway stretched impossibly long before her, the nursery door seeming to recede as she approached. Please, she gasped, unsure whether she was addressing her unborn child, Margaret's lingering presence or some higher power. Please help us. The nursery door swung open of its own accord as she reached it. Inside, the mobile spun rapidly, its gentle melody now a frantic, discordant tune. The rocking chair moved in violent arcs, empty yet propelled by unseen force. The air itself seemed charged, dense with desperate energy. Sarah collapsed on the threshold, consciousness flickering. Through half-closed eyes, she saw a figure standing by the crib, a woman in a white nightgown, her pregnant belly silhouetted against the storm-dark window. "Margaret?" Sarah whispered. The figure turned, revealing a face both familiar and strange, Margaret's features as seen in the locket photograph, but translucent, flickering like a candle flame in wind. "Protect," the apparition mouthed. One hand extended towards Sarah. "Danger!" Sarah tried to respond, But the words dissolved into a scream as pain lanced through her abdomen, sharp and insistent, nothing like the practiced contractions she'd experienced before. Something was terribly wrong. As consciousness slipped away, Sarah felt cool hands on her face. Real hands, solid and weather-roughened. "Sarah. Jesus Christ, Sarah, wake up!" Tom's voice reached her through layers of pain and confusion. She struggled to open her eyes, finding his worried face hovering above hers. "The baby," she managed. "Something's wrong with the baby." Tom's expression hardened with determination. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her with surprising gentleness despite his strength. Storms knocked out power everywhere. "Roads are icing over. Ambulance can't get through, but my truck has chains." His voice was steady, a lifeline in her panic. "Hold on. I'll get you to the hospital." As he carried her from the nursery, Sarah noticed something clutched in her right hand, Margaret's wedding ring, which had been stored in a jewelry box in her bedroom. She had no memory of retrieving it. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and fear. Tom's truck fishtailed on the icy roads as he navigated by memory through the storm's fury. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, each awakening bringing fresh waves of agony. "Preeclampsia," she heard a doctor say later. "The emergency room lights harsh after the storm's darkness. Blood pressure dangerously high. Need to monitor both mother and baby." "Save my baby," Sarah insisted, gripping the doctor's wrist with surprising strength. "Whatever happens, save my baby." As the medical team worked around her, inserting IVs and attaching monitors, Sarah felt the ring still clutched in her palm, warm now, almost hot against her skin. "She's with me," Sarah thought hazily. Margaret's still trying to help. The fetal heart monitor beeped steadily, each sound a precious confirmation of life continuing despite the danger. Sarah focused on that rhythm as darkness claimed her once more. "You should stay another day," the nurse insisted, checking Sarah's blood pressure one final time. "Preeclampsia isn't something to take lightly." "I know the warning signs now," Sarah replied, already pulling on the clothes Tom had brought her. "And I'll come back immediately if anything changes." 3 days in the hospital had stabilized her condition, but the doctors remained concerned. At 8 months pregnant with dangerously high blood pressure, Sarah was a walking risk. The responsible choice would be to remain under medical supervision, but something pulled her back to the house, an urgency she couldn't articulate to the medical staff or even to Tom, who watched her preparations with evident worry. "At least let me stay in the guest room," he said as he helped her into his truck. Just for a few days, Sarah didn't argue. The truth was, she needed him, not just for practical assistance, but for the solid, reassuring presence he provided. The house had grown increasingly active since her discovery of Margaret's final journal. Having Tom nearby made the unexplainable feel less threatening. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline winter landscape, ice-encased tree branches and power lines, transforming the world into a glittering, fragile sculpture garden. Tom drove carefully on the still treacherous roads. "Eleanor called the hospital twice," he mentioned. "She seemed particularly concerned about you returning to the house." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Eleanor's behavior had grown increasingly protective and increasingly strange in recent weeks. "Did she say why?" "Just that she had information you needed to hear." The house stood silent and cold when they arrived, the power still out from the storm. Tom immediately set to work starting the generator while Sarah, against his protests, built a fire in the living room fireplace. "I'm pregnant." "Not helpless," she reminded him, though in truth, she felt exhausted from even this small effort. By evening, they had restored some semblance of normalcy. Power had returned to the main areas of the house. The furnace was running, and they'd shared a simple meal of canned soup and sandwiches. But despite these comforts, Sarah couldn't shake the sense of urgency that had drawn her back. "I need to check something in the nursery," she announced, struggling to rise from the sofa. Tom frowned. "Can't it wait until morning?" "No," Sarah said simply, already heading for the stairs. "It can't." The nursery felt different, charged with expectation, like an audience awaiting a performer's entrance. The mobile hung motionless above the empty crib, its carved animals watching with painted eyes as Sarah crossed to the fireplace. In Margaret's final journal entry, she'd mentioned hiding documents in a safe. Sarah had searched the house repeatedly, but found no safe in any of the obvious locations. Now, guided by instinct or something more supernatural, she knelt awkwardly before the nursery fireplace and examined the bricks. One brick near the floor seemed slightly different from the others. Newer, perhaps, or at least less weathered. She pressed it experimentally and felt it give slightly. "Tom," she called. "I need your help." Together, they worked the loose brick free, revealing a small cavity behind it. Tom shone his flashlight into the opening. "There's something in there," he confirmed, reaching in carefully. His fingers closed around a metal box about the size of a hardcover book. The small safe was locked, but the mechanism was simple, a basic combination lock rather than a key. "Any idea what the combination might be?" Tom asked. Sarah thought for a moment, then reached for Margaret's journal. "Maybe it's in here somewhere." As she flipped through the familiar pages, her eyes caught on a passage she'd read before, but hadn't fully understood. "I've secured our future behind stone, protected by the date that changed everything." "The date that changed everything," Sarah murmured. What would that be for Margaret? She tried several possibilities. Margaret's wedding date, the date she discovered she was pregnant, the date she performed the ritual. None worked. The baby kicked vigorously as if offering a suggestion. Sarah placed her hand over the movement, a realization dawning. "The date she returned to give birth," she whispered, quickly finding the final journal entry. "April 2nd, 1927. She turned the dials to 421927. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing a stack of yellow documents and a small cloth pouch. As Sarah reached for them, the nursery door slammed shut behind them, and the mobile began to spin, its melody playing faster than Sarah had ever heard before. "Something's happening," Tom said unnecessarily, moving closer to Sarah as if to protect her. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, rattling the windows with unexpected fury. The storm was returning, or perhaps something else was coming. The doorbell rang through the house, its harsh electronic buzz incongruous against the backdrop of howling wind and the nursery mobile's eerie melody. Tom and Sarah exchanged startled glances. Who would be out in this weather? Sarah wondered, clutching the documents from the safe to her chest. Tom moved toward the door. "Stay here, I'll check." But Sarah followed him downstairs, unable to let the papers out of her possession now that she'd finally found them. They reached the foyer together as the bell rang again, more insistently. Through the frosted glass panels, they could make out a woman's silhouette. Small, elderly, familiar. "Eleanor!" Tom opened the door, revealing their neighbor hunched against the reviving storm. Snow dusting her silver hair. "Thank God you're home," Eleanor gasped, pushing past them into the house without waiting for an invitation. She was soaked and shivering, her usual composure shattered. "We don't have much time." "Time for what?" Sarah asked, alarmed by the older woman's uncharacteristic urgency. "What's happening?" Eleanor's gaze fixed on the papers in Sarah's hands. "You found it. Margaret's proof." Her voice carried a strange mix of relief and apprehension. "I've been waiting for this moment for so long." "Waiting?" Tom echoed, suspicion creeping into his tone. "How did you know about these documents?" Eleanor ignored him, focusing entirely on Sarah. "You need to understand what's happening. Why this house chose you. Why Margaret's spirit has been guiding you. How do you know about Margaret?" Sarah demanded. "Because she was my mother." The revelation hung in the air, momentarily drowning out even the storm's fury. Sarah stared at Eleanor, seeing her now with new eyes, the high cheekbones, the same wide-set eyes that had looked out from Margaret's locket photograph. "That's impossible," Tom said flatly. "Margaret Pembroke died in 1927. You'd be nearly 100 years old. 98, actually." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I age well." Sarah sank onto the stairs, her mind racing to accommodate this new reality. The historical society records said the Pembrokes were childless. "History is written by those with power," Eleanor replied. My father made sure his version of events became the official record. But the truth has a way of persisting. Tell me everything, Sarah whispered, instinctively knowing this was what she'd been drawn back to the house to hear. Eleanor glanced nervously at the windows, where the storm lashed with increasing violence. We should go to the nursery. It's where she'll be strongest. Who? Tom asked. My mother, Eleanor answered simply. Margaret. In the nursery, the mobile continued its frantic dance, the melody now haunting and insistent. Eleanor approached it with reverence, reaching up to touch one of the carved animals with a gnarled finger. She made these herself, she murmured, carved each one for the child she desperately wanted. You, Sarah said. Eleanor nodded. Me, born April 3rd, 1927, in this very room, during the worst spring storm in the county's history. She gestured toward the documents in Sarah's hands. Those papers prove my identity, my mother's final act of protection. Sarah unfolded the top document, a birth certificate for Eleanor Margaret Pembroke, with an official seal and signatures from a midwife and doctor. But how did you survive? What happened to Margaret? My mother died bringing me into the world, Eleanor said softly. The midwife who assisted the birth, Ida Gray's niece, smuggled me away before Henry could return. According to the plan Margaret had arranged, I was given to a local family, the Phillips, to raise as their own. But Henry was your father, Tom pointed out. Why didn't he want you? Eleanor's expression hardened. Henry Pembroke was not my father. I don't understand, Sarah said, though a suspicion was forming in her mind. The ritual my mother performed, Eleanor explained, was not just for protection. According to Ida, it was also an ancient fertility rite. Margaret was desperate for a child, and her husband had proven incapable. The ritual provided what modern medicine could not. Impossible. Tom muttered. Many things seem impossible until you experience them, Eleanor replied calmly. My entire life is proof of the impossible. The wind outside rose to a fever pitch, and the nursery door swung closed with a decisive bang. In the sudden quiet that followed, the mobile's melody changed to a sweet, gentle lullaby. She's here, Eleanor whispered, tears filling her eyes. My mother is here. The pain began as a dull ache in Sarah's lower back, barely noticeable against the backdrop of Eleanor's extraordinary revelations. But as the older woman continued her story, the discomfort intensified, radiating around Sarah's abdomen in unmistakable waves. My mother knew Henry would never accept a child that wasn't his, Eleanor explained, oblivious to Sarah's growing distress, especially one conceived through means he would consider unnatural. The documents in that safe not only prove my identity, but also establish my right to the Pembroke fortune. Fortune? Tom echoed, his attention divided between Eleanor's tale and Sarah's increasingly strained expression. Henry's lumber business was just the beginning, Eleanor continued. He invested heavily in steel, railroads, and later oil. By the time he died, he'd amassed considerable wealth that legally should have passed to Margaret's heir. Me. Sarah gripped the arm of the rocking chair, a gasp escaping as a particularly strong contraction seized her. Tom, she managed, I think the baby's coming. The room fell silent, save for the howling wind outside and the gentle melody of the mobile, still spinning lazily above the crib. It's too soon, Tom protested, moving swiftly to Sarah's side. You're barely 8 months along. Apparently, this baby has other ideas. Sarah attempted a smile that transformed into a grimace as another contraction hit. The storm's too severe for an ambulance, Eleanor said, surprisingly calm as she assessed the situation. Even if they could reach us, we'd never make it to the hospital. She met Sarah's frightened gaze with steady confidence. But I helped deliver 7 of my neighbor's children over the years. If you'll trust me, I believe we can do this. Trust seemed a complicated proposition, given Eleanor's bombshell revelations, but Sarah found herself nodding. Something about this felt right, fated even. Having her baby here, in this room, with Margaret's daughter assisting. The house has chosen you, Eleanor had said. Now Sarah understood why. Tom transformed the nursery with remarkable efficiency, following Eleanor's instructions to gather clean linens, hot water, and medical supplies from Sarah's bathroom. As he worked, Eleanor helped Sarah into a more comfortable position, timing contractions with experienced precision. "They're coming fast," she noted. "This little one is in a hurry." Outside, the storm reached a crescendo, snow and ice lashing the windows with renewed fury. Inside, the nursery remained supernaturally warm, the air thick with expectation. The mobile's melody grew louder, though no one had wound it. "She's with us," Eleanor murmured, noticing Sarah's gaze fixed on the spinning animals. "My mother. She's been waiting for this." Pain transcended all rational thought as Sarah's labor progressed with unnatural speed. Through the haze of agony, she became aware of another presence in the room. Not just Eleanor and Tom, but something else. Someone else. A gentle pressure against her shoulder, like a comforting hand, steadied her through the worst contractions. "Margaret," she whispered during a brief reprieve. "She's here." Eleanor smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Of course she is. She's been waiting almost a century for this moment." "For what moment?" Tom asked, wiping Sarah's forehead with a cool cloth. "For her granddaughter to be born in this room," Eleanor replied. "For the circle to be completed." Before Tom could question this cryptic statement, Sarah cried out as the most powerful contraction yet seized her. "It's time," Eleanor announced, positioning herself at the foot of the makeshift bed. "With the next pain, Sarah, I need you to push." What followed was a blur of agony and effort, of Eleanor's calm instructions and Tom's steady support. Throughout it all, Sarah remained acutely aware of the unseen presence beside her, encouraging, protecting, guiding. With a final, tremendous push and a primal scream that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house, Sarah felt her daughter enter the world. The baby's first cry coincided with a blinding flash of lightning, followed by profound silence as the storm abruptly ceased. In that moment of perfect stillness, Sarah could have sworn she saw a figure standing at the foot of the bed, a woman in a white nightgown, her face serene as she gazed upon the newborn child with unmistakable love. "Margaret?" Eleanor breathed, following Sarah's gaze to the now empty space. Tom placed the swaddled infant in Sarah's arms, his expression a mix of awe and bewilderment. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Looking down at her daughter's face, Sarah felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The baby gazed back with wide, knowing eyes, eyes that held the wisdom of generations. "Hello, Margaret," Sarah murmured, the name coming to her lips unbidden but utterly right. "Welcome home." Spring sunshine filtered through newly installed curtains, casting warm patches across the restored nursery floor. Sarah rocked gently in the antique chair, baby Margaret sleeping peacefully in her arms. 3 months had passed since that stormy night of unexpected birth, and the transformation of both mother and house was remarkable. The mansion, once decaying and forlorn, now stood proudly restored. Fresh paint covered the exterior, the sagging porch had been rebuilt, and inside each room gleamed with renewed purpose. What had begun as a desperate escape had become a true home, not just for Sarah and her daughter, but for a most unusual extended family. "There's my girls," Tom called softly from the doorway. His initial skepticism about Eleanor's supernatural claims had gradually given way to a quiet acceptance of the inexplicable. More importantly, his role as protector and helper had evolved into something deeper, his steady presence becoming essential to their daily life. "She just fell asleep," Sarah whispered, carefully transferring the baby to the restored crib, the same one Margaret Pembroke had prepared a century earlier for her own child. The mobile above played its gentle melody, though no one had wound it. Some things about the house would always remain mysterious, Sarah had learned to accept. Not everything needed logical explanation. Downstairs, Eleanor arranged flowers in the renovated kitchen, her movements spry despite her advanced years. The documents from the hidden safe had indeed confirmed her identity and her claim to the Pembroke fortune, a substantial inheritance that had funded not only the house's restoration but established trusts for both Eleanor and baby Margaret. The lawyer called, Eleanor announced as Sarah and Tom entered the kitchen. Henry's remaining relatives have dropped their challenge to the estate claim. The DNA test was rather conclusive, she smiled wryly, though I doubt they understand exactly how I came to be. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, Margaret's locket, now containing a tiny photograph of baby Margaret alongside the original image of her namesake. Some mysteries are better left unexplained. The supernatural occurrences that had once seemed frightening had gradually subsided after the birth. The nursery mobile still played occasionally without being wound, and sometimes objects would be found rearranged in subtle ways, but the frantic energy had dissipated, replaced by a sense of peaceful watchfulness. I think she found what she was waiting for, Eleanor had explained. A continuation of what was taken from her. Not just a child born in that room, but a family protected and provided for. As spring advanced into summer, their unusual household settled into comfortable routines. Tom moved permanently into the guest room, though he spent increasingly more time in Sarah's company. Eleanor divided her time between her own home and the mansion, doting on her namesake great-granddaughter with boundless affection. The town's attitude shifted as well. The revelation that Eleanor Phillips was actually Eleanor Pembroke, rightful heir to the county's founding family, had sparked a reassessment of local history. The strange incidents of hostility ceased, replaced by cautious curiosity and eventually genuine welcome. On Margaret's christening day, Sarah stood in the nursery, adjusting her daughter's gown, handmade from the fabric of the quilt that had lined the crib for nearly a century. "Do you think she knows?" Sarah asked Eleanor, who supervised from the rocking chair. "Your mother. Do you think she knows how everything turned out?" Eleanor smiled, her eyes drifting to the corner of the room where sometimes, in certain lights, a shadow seemed to linger. "I believe she does." As if in confirmation, the mobile began to turn, its sweet melody filling the room. Baby Margaret cooed happily, her tiny hands reaching toward the carved animals dancing above her. Sarah followed her daughter's gaze and for a brief moment saw what the baby saw. A woman in a white nightgown, smiling with infinite tenderness at the scene before her. Then the image faded, leaving only a sense of profound peace. Outside, Tom called that the christening guests were arriving. Eleanor rose to help Sarah with final preparations. As they left the nursery, Sarah paused in the doorway, looking back at the sunlit room that had once been sealed away in grief, but now overflowed with joy. "Thank you," she whispered, to the gentle presence that would always inhabit this house. For everything, the door closed softly behind her. Not with finality, but with promise. The promise of a future built on foundations both seen and unseen. A legacy preserved and renewed across generations of women who had found strength in each other across the boundaries of time itself.